Hey guys, it's BlockchainBrad, and today we're talking about all things Loom. And in the hot seat, we have the co-founder. His name is James Duffy. James, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brad, for having me.
No problem. Now, you don't pussyfoot around. That's literally written in some of your Medium articles. You've stated also that you don't do things half-assed. And I just want to be frank about this because everything about your approach is pragmatic, right down to exactly what you stand for. You state that you are building scalable blockchain solutions, large-scale ones, built using DPoS to essentially change the game with regard to how you're evolving as a sidechain system and solution, specifically for the future of online gaming, of social DApps, and beyond that. So James, tell us exactly, what is Loom all about?
Yeah, so basically, in short, we're a scaling solution for Ethereum with a focus on large-scale DApps. And we've focused initially on games and social DApps because this is where we see adoption coming from first. But as a technology, as an infrastructure, you can use Loom Network to build any type of DApp.
Okay, so you're built on the Ethereum network, as you say. Let's talk about this a little bit more because initially you had a different plan with regard to DApps. So talk us through the iterations from the beginning, based on feedback also, from the DApp chain moving forth into what is now known as the PlasmaChain.
Yeah, so our original idea was that it was pretty clear to us that blockchains, decentralized blockchains, don't scale. Now you can make a more scalable blockchain by sacrificing decentralization, but then you're kind of losing the main purpose of having a blockchain in the first place. So our initial idea was through using sidechains, and we called them application-specific sidechains, which we then rebranded to DApp chains. Essentially, you have one sidechain per DApp, and then each DApp chain has its own validators. But because it's a sidechain to Ethereum, you get the security of Ethereum mainnet for storing the value of the tokens, which you can move back and forth to these DApp chains. Once we released our SDK and developers were able to build these DApp chains, what we found when talking to developers is that most developers, they didn't want to have to host their own sidechain. They didn't want to have to figure out validators, figure out consensus. So the SDK is fully flexible, so you can customize all these parameters. We found most developers, they just want to focus on building their DApp, and then they just want somewhere to deploy it to that's more scalable than Ethereum. So that brought us to our next iteration, which was these shared sidechains, where basically it's a DPoS sidechain to Ethereum. It's basically EOS on Ethereum is what some people have called us because you get the same consensus algorithm and scalability of EOS, but you're doing it as a sidechain to Ethereum. And then this way, instead of deploying to Ethereum mainnet, the developer could deploy their application to the shared sidechain and get an enormous amount more scalability, but they'd still have the security of that base layer.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because you're quite unique from my experience anyway, because you don't have a white paper. You've talked about specifically the response from the developers. So talk us through those two points. Firstly, why didn't you have a white paper, James? And secondly, how has the feedback generally been from the devs as you've evolved and as you've changed?
Yeah, so initially the white paper thing, it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing because we thought it was stupid how projects would have zero tech, zero lines of code, and then they just write this document and investors were, throwing tons of money at them with no promise that they even had the ability to execute on it. Or a lot of these just became, kind of these marketing plans kind of thing. So from our perspective, we said it doesn't make sense to write the documentation for a product that doesn't exist yet. So let's build the basic version of the product first, and then we'll write the documentation, then we'll write the white paper or whatever. And then along the way, yeah, we kind of played it up kind of as a tongue-in-cheek thing. We said we don't write white papers, we ship product. But yeah, that was kind of the general idea, is that it doesn't matter what you say you're going to do. What matters is actually executing and building something. And then once you have a product for people to use, then you write the documentation for how to use it.
Sure, but James, in that respect, you often see in this industry, this burgeoning industry now, code reviewers. You see apparently so-called expert code reviewers who are doing analysis of GitHub code that's been sent to them, sometimes privately. What do you say to that? Given that often there's limited code from the outset, surely you're a proponent of building, along the way and focusing on the process. But again, you still have this propensity for some projects to announce that they have robust code right from the get-go.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, yeah, so us as well, we haven't open sourced all of our code because it's a competitive advantage. As soon as you open source your code, you're going to have 30 projects who just copy your code base and then say, oh, we built this thing. So for us, it makes sense to wait until the code is, we have enough of a lead on it, then we can open source those components once they're tried and true. So yeah, I mean, that is true. There's no perfect solution there where it's hard probably for an outside party to audit the code, but we release enough of our code. One independent audit calculated kind of the GitHub activity of different projects, and they rated our project as number 2 in terms of activity. And that's with less than half of our repos actually being public. So
wow, that's substantial. So
I think you can release enough code to kind of show people, hey, we're serious, hey, we're building, this is what we have so far, and you can actually use it today.
Absolutely. So given that, and obviously there's a lot of people interacting at the developer level, how's the feedback been of the changes that you've made, as you mentioned, moving from the DApp chain across to a more sidechain based system? How's that been?
Yeah, that's kind of, I mean, most of the developers who we've talked to who are in the beta of our SDK, that's what they wanted. So they wanted things simplified.
It makes you quite unique in that respect because you genuinely are almost collectively building out this technology with your developers. You're not really simply just a core team, but it's almost like you're subsumed in a group, a larger, much larger group of very much trusted developers. You know, clearly a part of your Discord, clearly part of the developer community that you're part of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to find product market fit. You have to be building a solution for some problem. And if you're not working with developers who are trying to actually build something and are running into problems, then you're building a ghost town. You're building what you think is the perfect system in isolation in a box, and then trying to unleash it on the world and hope you got it perfect on day one, which just in the world of startups is not feasible or realistic.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges with starting up a project and what sets you apart. But if we could talk now a little bit more about the PlasmaChain itself, James, because it's the first really fundamental part of your system. Can you tell us a bit more about what was initially known as a zombie chain? Now it is this PlasmaChain with regard to its core features.
Yeah, so Zombie chain was originally what we called that shared sidechain I was talking about, where developers could use it as a layer 2 and just deploy their apps to it. We had also been working on a Plasma Cash implementation, and for those who don't know, Plasma Cash is basically a way to secure the sidechain assets fully. You don't put any trust into the sidechain validators. Basically, with the normal sidechain, the user would transfer their funds to a wallet that's owned by the sidechain validators, and they'd have to trust that the sidechain validators would send them back that money, you know, when they want to withdraw it. Kind of like an exchange, except it's not just one party. There's multiple validators, so there's more decentralization. Plasma Cash is kind of the next iteration where now you don't have to trust the validators at all, because that smart contract on Ethereum that you send the funds to, you can send a withdrawal request to that smart contract. And the sidechain would have to show a signed transaction from you saying that you spent the funds on the sidechain. And they would say, "How you can't withdraw these funds, you don't own them anymore." If they don't have a signed transaction from you, they can't stop you from withdrawing your money.
Right. And in that context, it suits much of that analogy of the clearinghouse, or even, you know, for DEXs as well. It's well situated.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we see the biggest use case for this is on a DEX, because that's one of the biggest issues in the crypto space right now is the trust that we put in exchanges, and exchanges will hold, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars in user assets at a time. So yeah, we kind of realized that there was this common feature set that a lot of DApps would want to use on the sidechain. And one of those is Plasma Cash to secure the user transfers. One is kind of a built-in DEX that lets you do token atomic swaps, a marketplace for buying and selling like ERC-721 in-game assets. So we kind of...
Are they the non-fungible ones?
Exactly.
Right.
So yeah, that's what you would use to represent, playing cards in, or a card battle game, or like swords and armor or CryptoKitties, things like that, characters. So yeah, we kind of, through interaction and feedback with the developers who are building on us, and also the games that we're building in-house, we kind of realized this is kind of the basic core feature set that a lot of people would want for this chain. And we kind of packaged all that together and rebranded Zombie Chain to PlasmaChain.
Right, and obviously it's known as that hub, and we'll talk about those layers in a moment. But I want to talk about some of the core potentials of this particular plasma chain with regard to its sub-second speed, its compatibility, or its native Solidity foundation. And again, if we can rehash back on the Loom SDK as well. So, how important is it to have these kind of speeds? Let's start with that.
So for something like a game or any user-facing application, it's immensely important, because anytime the user writes to the blockchain on Ethereum, you have to wait, 15 seconds, sometimes a couple minutes for that confirmation. You're playing a turn-based game, that just destroys the playability. Your opponent makes a move, and then everyone sits there waiting for this confirmation. So a turn-based game, it feels just as fluid as a normal turn-based game. Like the blockchain's kind of transparent in the background. And same thing with something like a social app. If you post a comment on someone's article or something, you want to see that comment come up immediately. You need that like fast user feedback so they can see the action that they just took was actually reflected on the blockchain.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. Now, with regard to the programming language of Ethereum, Solidity, always difficult to say. Now, you're utilizing that, given that you're based on Ethereum. Can you talk us through whether that's a boon or whether that's going to preclude you from really going global?
So I would say it's a good thing. Like, the reason why we did that is because we run the Ethereum code school Crypto Zombies, which has now had, by today, it should have had over 300,000 users in total. If you look at the stats from Consensus on, the number of users who are using Truffle Suite for development, I think it's something like over 500,000. There's a lot of developers who are familiar with Solidity. It's just one of those things where it's not a perfect programming language. It's not a great programming language, but probably at this point, it's so widespread that it's here to stay. So it's kind of like JavaScript was for the internet. A lot of people hate JavaScript as a programming language, but it was just so widespread that it had its claws in. It was there to stay. It's kind of how we see Solidity being.
Right, and we'll talk about one of the reasons why you chose Ethereum later, if that's okay. But I wanted to talk to you about the SDK for a moment. Specifically, what are the core assets of the SDK? What sets it apart from other SDKs that we've seen, with regard to what your vision is?
So what the SDK is at its core is a blockchain generator. So if you look at the Steam blockchain, for example, Steemit, this was a custom blockchain that was built from the ground up, or I think it was a fork of BitShares maybe, and had a team of developers, took kind of years to get this blockchain to where it is right now. If you wanted to build your own Steem, if you wanted to build say a game blockchain, it's not scalable for every team to have to build these same components from the ground up. So our SDK is a blockchain generator where you choose kind of your base layer consensus algorithm. You choose how many validators there's going to be on the blockchain and how they get elected. You kind of, there's all these swappable components, and it comes with things like the transfer gateway for Ethereum to be able to transfer assets, or a Plasma cash contract. So it's kind of like, the developers would be able to choose all these parameters, and then boom, it just spits out a sidechain that's a software that's good to go, and the validators can just run it.
Right, and it's good to hear that you're building out these technologies and these core tools for developers, and you're not essentially utilizing someone else's technology in that respect. But if we could talk now about the layers, and I want to be really clear about this, because as you explained, we've now progressed from what was initially that DApp chain. You now have that as what's known as the layer 2 solution. So at the bottom you have Ethereum, then moving up to this Plasma level for layer 2, and then importantly some key side chains. And we'll talk about specifically what some of those are, such as Game Chain. But can you talk us through this this tri-level, these layers, and why it's been important to build from the ground up from Ethereum?
Sure. So the layer 3 thing is kind of like a conceptual, this is how we think things might expand and how the universe might grow from here.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically, originally we were thinking everything connects to Ethereum, everything goes through Ethereum when you're transferring assets. There's a lot of use cases where you're going to want a DEX for atomic swaps. You're going to want faster transfers, things like that. So we realized kind of this plasma chain, because it uses plasma cash to be secured to Ethereum, that would make a really good kind of hub for all these other side chains who just want to be able to transact quickly between each other, because the clearing times are just much quicker than Ethereum mainnet.
Right, and in that respect, just sorry to interrupt, but initially the functionality of that plasma chain, as when it was previously not the plasma chain, that was functioning much like the others, wasn't it? As more
exactly.
sidechain. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that respect, what's the plan? Because the confusion I had when I was researching is really it's a multitude of blockchains that you're building, and this system, plasma chain, is just one of them. So is it in fact a core system that really can onboard a potentially infinite number of side chains in the future?
So no blockchain scales to infinity.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of kind of the core pieces of our hypothesis. Is we realized this early, and we realized you're going to need to scale horizontally.
Mm-hmm.
So it's possible. I'm just really ideating right now. Plasma chain at some point will hit a capacity, and then there might need to be a plasma chain 2, for example. But then it's kind of like with Ethereum gas fees, right? It'll just, as there's more competition to use the same resources,
Right.
The market will work it out. Or we might end up with like layer 3 hubs on top of plasma chain that become the clearing houses. It's kind of hard to see exactly where all this is going to evolve, but that's kind of why we think it's like really important to experiment and iterate and get user feedback and see what's working.
Absolutely. Now, James, with regard to your focus on Ethereum, is there any potential at all to move out into a more agnostic position, whereby you could potentially allow for EOS, for example, or Neo, or some other platform to really benefit from your technology?
Yeah, it's definitely technically possible. Core piece of our thesis, though, is that the layer 1 blockchain needs to be as decentralized as possible. And right now, the only 2 blockchains that really fit that bill are Ethereum and Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is just less flexible from a developer perspective to be able to use it as that layer 1, because they've optimized themselves to be digital gold and not do that much else. So it's a lot more cumbersome for a developer. The smart contracts are much more limited.
And we could talk for hours on that point, but I did want to ask you this: for all those BTC, I guess, maximalists out there, is there still a place in the context of currency, in the context of gold? Let's talk about that for a moment, for BTC as we pursue enterprise, because essentially that's the frame in which you're pursuing. You're looking at business on a blockchain, specifically focused on things like gaming to start off with. Is BTC in an entirely different game right from the outset?
Yeah, I think so. And I think BTC will always have a place in the future. I don't think BTC is going anywhere. I think it's the oldest blockchain out there. Because it's so conservative, it's also kind of the most stable and the most trusted, and it's the most widely well known. So just because of, the network effect, when you have new institutional investors coming into the market, BTC is going to be kind of like their first base level purchase.
Sure. And not to digress, because obviously I want to focus on your project.
Yeah.
But if we now move across to that terminology of altcoin, I want to talk to you about that, because you are essentially one of them. Is that possibly a misappropriation in itself? Because essentially you're all startups. You're all trying to do your own core business. Is it something that really should be redressed, so that each plan, each project, each business initiative is trying to be seen in its own light, just as BTC is?
Yeah, I don't use the term altcoin personally, just because, again, it's not, we're not trying to be an alternative to Bitcoin. It's just a totally different use case. Bitcoin is payments, digital gold, currency. We're focused exclusively on applications.
Right. I'm glad you clarified that. I don't often get a chance to speak of that with projects, so I appreciate that a lot. Now, if we could talk a little bit more on the discussion previously.
I will add
Mm,
one more thing on
sure.
that. Is that we are
Yeah.
actually planning to integrate the Plasma chain for BTC payments. So basically, we can't build like a Plasma Cash integration, but users would be able to deposit BTC onto the Plasma chain and then use that to purchase like in-game items as a currency.
Right. And you mentioned about decentralization, and I've read through all of the different notes in your Medium articles. You're very much a proponent of that authentic decentralized agenda. Now, there is no such thing as a 100% decentralized system yet, except for the Nakamoto protocol itself. Not even BTC are achieving it entirely. So is it more that you're trying to be as decentralized as possible?
Yeah, yeah. So you're correct. This is like a very complex subject, but nothing has come close to proof of work yet in terms of like, because it's not the fact that it's like 100% evenly split, right? It's the fact that you can't identify who's validating the network, and anyone can turn on their computer tomorrow and join as a validator on that network. So it's kind of that freedom to join the network. Yeah, no institution, no family with tons, billions of dollars could identify and target all of those validators, kind of wine and dine them, whatever, like get control over those validators, and boom, now you have a single entity that's influencing more than 50% of the network. Yeah, you could argue that there are mining pools that have approached 50% of network domination, but keep in mind these pools are made up of individuals who are contributing their hash power, and these individuals can move to another pool. It's not like one entity's in control of all of that. And that
Right.
doesn't mean that that's not a problem, and people shouldn't be focusing on fixing this, but I'd say it's the most decentralized that we've seen.
Sure, and particularly Ethereum in that context, as you mentioned, it really does try to really spread those nodes across and allow for a more distributed and more autonomous system. And that was always the premise right from the outset that Vitalik had and his team. If we could talk now, though, about users, because that's another thing that I understand is the reason why you focused on Ethereum. It has a very large developer base, and it also has huge potential for use cases such as gaming, given that it's already essentially in pole position.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of this is just kind of the Lindy effect, that the longer something is around, the more trustworthy it is as a system, and the more likely people are to use it. The more tools it has built out on it. So if you want to build something on Ethereum, you have this suite of tools that makes it a lot easier. You have Truffle, you have MetaMask, you have Infura, you have Web3. There's all these developer libraries that kind of have taken years to get to that point. If you're building on a new platform or a new chain, it kind of doesn't have all that infrastructure yet. And then it's also, you just see this in normal startups. If you're a company and you're looking for a help desk software to use, you could use, Zendesk or Freshdesk or one of these ones that's been around forever, or you could use some new startup that sprung up 6 months ago. But you're kind of taking a risk with that startup. Are they going to still be there 5 years from now? Are they going to, run out of funding?
Right.
Are they going to have all the features? So we just kind of see this in all systems where the longer something's been around, the more people are using it, the more trusted it is. And to us, it just made sense we want to go where the developers are. We want to go where the developers are building. And that's Ethereum by far. It's orders of magnitude higher than any other platform right
Absolutely.
now.
It makes a lot of sense, James. Now, with regard to fees, you mentioned these before. You're doing something a little bit different with regard to charging developers, as I understand. Can you talk us through what the plan is as you build out your fee structure?
Yeah, so basically one of our core premises is that you can't charge users microtransactions on every action they want to take in a game, because it just there's a psychological effect there, where if you have to pay a fraction of a penny every time you move your character or every time you take some action, even if that fee is so low, it kind of causes a temporary paralysis where you're second guessing like everything you're going to do in that game.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really worth me making this move from here to here? So it doesn't work for games in particular. And so, yeah, one of our premises was that transactions need to be free for the user. And so instead of in Ethereum where the users pay gas fees, we're putting those fees on the developer, like you would in traditional web hosting. Someone's hosting a SaaS, they're paying web hosting fees, to host the database, to host the software, the PC, everything like that. So it's kind of like the developer that deploys the DApp, they would fund the smart contract, and we're going to have a fixed monthly pricing based on the transaction volume of that DApp.
Okay, now in that context, what could a developer do to try and get some of that money back, over time? I've read the idea of a donation system.
Yeah, there's lots of ideas, but this is just like any other business. If you're going to start a service, you're going to have to pay the hosting fees, so you'll want some way to pay for that. One way would be to have premium features that you charge your users for. Have a free version and a premium version. If it's a game, you can have in-app purchases. Our model for gaming is we want to try to monetize based on like commission fees when the users buy and sell their items on the marketplace, as opposed to charging the users to play. Or you could have the users themselves could just donate money into that smart contract, and it could be not owned by anyone, but it's just kind of like community run. So yeah, I don't think we know all the answers there, but there's a lot of options, and I think kind of best practices will emerge for how to fund and monetize these dApps.
Sure. Now, what about your team, James? How can the community know for sure that you have the expertise? Given that you're applying this in a very innovative way, you're literally listening to the developers as you build. So you truly are a process-based system. How can we know for sure that you have the capacity to really properly unfold until a point of mass adoption?
I would just say look at our track record up until now. I think we're a big proponent of show, don't say. So I mean, we've had a track record of shipping code, shipping products, hitting deadlines. Yeah, we move extremely quickly, and we're always pushing new things out. So,
and how is your team number going? What's your current capacity?
We're somewhere in the mid 60s in number of people, 65, something like that.
Right. And do you mind if I ask, James, how are you affording to have such a large team? How are you funding that?
Yeah, so we were privately funded. We did a private token sale at the beginning of this year.
Okay, now let's talk about that for a moment. You are going to, have people respond to that, and no doubt they have already. What is your viewpoint on being entirely private in the spirit of decentralization, in the spirit of access, in the spirit of letting the public in? What is your viewpoint on running an entirely private ICO or private sale, I should say?
Yeah, I think right now, because of the regulatory climate, it wasn't feasible to do a public sale. Just because of SEC regulations, and we were advised by our attorney that it's better if we don't go the public sale route. So basically, we did a private sale all to accredited investors, and yeah, I mean, from there, the tokens kind of like trickle out into the marketplace. So it's kind of like
how have you combated some of that malign behavior? We see it all the time in blockchain, and certainly in crypto rather, is this kind of dumping, this kind of OTC stuff that goes on, back end deals. Have you experienced anything like that, and how have you dealt with it?
I mean, it's hard to know once it's kind of out in the wild. It's hard to know exactly what's going on, and that's one thing about crypto projects and systems being open, is that you can't really control what people are going to do with them, what's going to happen with them. Yeah, I don't know if I have any kind of insightful comments to put on that, but
I do appreciate your honesty though, and your transparency, because it's not often that you get a CEO or someone as an executive member in the top seat or hot seat having a discussion like this, and then just being completely genuine about the nature of crypto and the risks inherent with the kind of private sale system that is what it is today.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you see all these projects, we just saw with this bull and boom, this bull and bear cycle, and you see the prices of these crypto tokens kind of going crazy, and it's really impossible to know what's actually happening. And that's one of the problems with a lot of exchanges today, is you do have this kind of wash trading, and it's not regulated. And at least with, if you have like a real decentralized exchange, at least that's all transparent. You can see like what funds the exchange is actually holding, you can see inside the books basically. So
and speaking of that, James, how transparent have you been with that private sale? Obviously, it was behind closed doors. Are you releasing all the information? For example, who were the strategic investors, how much they invested, that kind of stuff?
No, we're not, because those were all private deals that were under non-disclosure agreements for, but we have publicly announced some of our investors. Techstars New York was one of them. The Ventures, which is a Korean seed stage VC.
But I wanted to ask you though, back in the time frame or the time period when you were raising capital, clearly there was a lot of money flowing, probably at the end of a very significant bull run. So congratulations for achieving that and raising all of that. But inherent, I've noticed a lot of projects are essentially being backed by crypto VCs. Not a lot of value add with regard to service discussions in 2017. Did you have any discussions with each of your investors about how they could go beyond just the capital support?
Yeah, we did. And all of our investors have been phenomenal in terms of helping us and supporting us. And yeah.
Okay, that's great.
We were really lucky in terms of finding. Yeah.
That's great, because often, I would imagine that in the 2017, that just didn't happen with a lot of different projects because there was so much liquidity. There was so much money flowing at that time. Now, I want to ask you with regard to blockchain. Now, you've recently, and we'll discuss this further, created what is essentially the world's first 100% on blockchain operating PC and mobile game. Very successful, but why the blockchain? You've mentioned that people using this kind of game with its speeds now totally aligned with mainstream games being able to function properly. Why do you need to do it with the blockchain?
Games are kind of one of the first obvious use cases of the blockchain beyond payments and finances and security tokens and things like that. And the most obvious reason is real ownership of in-game assets that you can buy and you can sell and you can trade freely. So you take a game like Hearthstone, which is Blizzard's card game. Competitive players sink hundreds, thousands of dollars into this game and buying card packs directly from Blizzard. This is great for Blizzard because it's over $1 billion game, right, in terms of revenue. But now if someone plays this game, if they want that one specific card to complete their deck, they can't just buy it from a friend or trade a card with a friend like you could with real physical cards. They have to just keep buying card packs from Blizzard, these loot boxes, and just hope they eventually get it. And then beyond that, if you quit the game after 6 months, after 2 years, and you spent $1,000 on cards, that's just a sunk cost. Whereas in my parents' house back in the US, I have a drawer full of Magic the Gathering cards from when I played back in middle school. Right. And I still own those, and I could resell those. I could have resold them at any point and kind of recoup that investment. I would trade with friends. If you wanted one specific card, you could go to the shop and buy that one card. So this is the one obvious advantage, is now you can have these marketplaces where players can just buy and sell and trade during game assets.
So you really are changing it back to old models of collectability to be able to and trade, but utilizing the blockchain in a way that essentially everyone was precluded from in the previous generation because they was all centrally owned.
Yeah, exactly. And it's even better than kind of the physical collectibles, because you can have these online massive peer-to-peer marketplaces, and you have a lot more price discovery data. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, so that's kind of the first most obvious benefit. And then, and beyond that, it's when you buy these things, the game is never going to shut down if it's running on the blockchain. A lot of these games, you invested thousands of hours playing the game, collecting all these items. The company decided to shut down the server because it's not profitable anymore, and all those items just disappear. I was talking to a friend about this. It would be kind of cool if I played Diablo 2 way back in the day. Kind of cool if I could just have a folder on my computer that I could just open and look at my Diablo 2 items and characters and whatever. Even if I didn't play the game anymore, it's these are mine. I own these. I earn these.
Absolutely. I'm not a gamer myself, but I want to go and now utilize this system because I just think the fact that you can control it, the fact that you can build upon your own sort of stack of assets digitally is just a really cool thing. And in that context, I want to talk to you about two things. One is competitors, and the other one is more specifically the kind of size of this industry of gaming. You obviously chose it for a reason. Let's talk about that a bit.
Sure. And we can dive back into the benefits because I was just scratching the surface there.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of competitor size of the industry, yeah, so there's, I think the stats were there's 2.2 billion gamers worldwide, people who are playing games. About half of those are paying users. So we're just talking about a huge market here. And then when you dive even further into the stats in terms of how many new games these users are downloading on their mobile phones and whatnot, I think the numbers I came up with were it's over 100 million gamers who download a new game every single day. There's like this huge hungry market that's just, they're looking for something fun to play. Traditionally with the blockchain app, if you want to get adoption, you have to do something 10 times better than the centralized service, because users don't really care that it's decentralized. If you say it's Facebook but decentralized, people are like, well, all my friends are on Facebook. I'm just going to keep using that. Like decentralization, that's kind of cool, but it's not that important.
I think you raised the most important point right now of the entire point of cryptocurrency and blockchain, is that if there's no real use cases, there's no benefit beyond simply the platform itself that someone's using, then no one is going to transition. And you make that clear in a lot of the Medium articles also, in the imperative and how you go into detail about changing the game with regard to usership. You know, I think you have one of two key points you raise in one of your articles.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we see games as being kind of the gateway to adoption, because these users will just download a game because it looks fun, especially because we lower the barriers. So you don't need MetaMask, you don't need an Ethereum wallet. Our game, Zombie Battleground, it's just a normal mobile game that any user can download on the App Store when it's released toward the end of this year, and then start playing. And they don't even know that the whole backend is running on a blockchain. And then through the course of playing, we can say, oh, you just earned these new cards. Did you know you can trade these on our marketplace? Users like, oh, that's kind of cool. They go to the marketplace. It's kind of like a digital eBay for digital in-game assets. They can sell things. They can earn some cryptocurrency. They can buy other cards. You know, they can kind of like trade this way. And then through that process, we can teach them, oh, these are actually backed by the blockchain, which means you have full ownership of these. It's not on some company's server. You know, teach them about decentralization. Then you have a whole generation of users who just got their first ETH or their first BTC or whatever. And they're like, oh.
So in that respect, I want to just interrupt and ask you, is it really a case about first acknowledging the importance of the populist game, you know, the game that everyone wants to use, and then educate from that point? So it's almost like a post-educational standpoint that you're taking, rather than try and educate about the values of blockchain and then try and integrate in a more, you know, I guess, idealistic approach.
You can attack from both angles. I think, you know, kind of attacking this problem from all angles is good. We just looked at this like, we want to have the blockchain platform that has the most user adoption. What's the quickest way to do that? Because we think the platform that has the most users operating on it is going to be the platform that wins. That's going to be the one that's there to stay.
Sure. Well, if we want to just talk a bit more about the benefits, and then I want to talk to you about that adoption factor and what you're doing specifically about that. But let's just talk about a little bit more of the benefits that you were talking about before.
Sure. And I think one of the coolest benefits is because this data is not owned by anyone. It's on the blockchain. Anyone can read it, and any user can write to that and interact with that, and they can't be blocked from accessing it. So it's data that everyone can trust. And this means third-party developers know that they can build on this data, and they can build a game that integrates with it, and it's not going to go anywhere. Like, this game's not going to shut down in 5 years, or the developer's not going to turn off API access to third-party developers. So now, say someone has a really popular blockchain game where everyone has a character, and they buy or create their own skins, and they customize their own character. They collect items, weapons, armor, whatever. Another developer is building a game, and they say, oh, I want to tap into this huge player base. I'm going to read these character data and let everyone import their character into my game. That's good for this developer, because now he has this huge user base that he can kind of tempt into trying his game. is good for the players because now their game world just expanded that they can kind of, go inside. And it's good for the original developer too, because it's using his same character as people. It's going to get kind of, they're all sharing the same characters to, they're kind of all building this game world collectively. And then you kind of, by extension, think you get to something like Ready Player One, right? Where we have these this digital avatar that's persistent, and there's like all these different worlds that we can go in. And I think really the blockchain is the way that something like that would come to be, just because everyone's incentivized to build on this together.
And what about rewards? Are you building any reward system in for those users as they move into this new wave on this new world of decentralized tech for gaming? Can they also benefit from this tokenized economy?
So we're starting with Zombie Battleground, which is the card battle game, because that was the easiest MVP that we could see that would kind of demonstrate this possibility, and we could execute in a short period of time. So the benefit to the players here are, well, they can actually earn cards from grinding in the game. When you win matches, you earn card packs, you open them up. That a small percentage of these cards that they'll get from the rewards are these limited edition versions, which are cosmetically superior. They're animated versions or shinier cards. And these are extremely rare. And they're actually limited in quantity, and we're mining them based on Bitcoin's algorithm. So basically for each season, the rewards will have periodically until all those cards are collected. And now these cards are, because they're rare, will have value on the marketplace. So players who are playing the game can earn these cards and they can sell them, and they could even earn real income just by playing a game. That's
because obviously the token equates to real value and real USD, essentially, because it's a tokenized, decentralized economy.
Yeah, so it's weird and interesting thinking of cards as tokens. We've called them non-fungible tokens, but I think that also causes some confusion in terms of like a security sense or something, because really this is just, it's an asset that you own that you can transfer to other people. And in this case, it's proven in the smart contract that only a certain number of them exist.
Sure, and given that the scarcity factor alone, that's substantial also because you've built in this reward system. So there really is genuine value built into some of these scarce cards, and you're going to replicate that kind of scarcity opportunity through the models and through onboarding different high quality games. But I want to talk to you now about, again, those competitors in the context of how do you get high quality games? How do you make sure that the quality comes to you? How do you build out an ecosystem whereby you're competitive with quality?
Yeah, so there's a couple aspects to this. One is by making it as easy as possible for developers to build on it, which is why we've been working closely with our first developers to kind of make the SDK easier and easier to use and build on. The second one is we think the real boom is going to come here when you get traditional game companies who are already really good at making really fun, addicting games and get them to build their next game on the blockchain. And a large company is unlikely to take that leap right now because they have a tried and true business model. They're not going to experiment. But the mid-sized game companies, and the smaller game companies, they're going to be a lot more willing to try this out. And we figured the best way to approach them is to build a success story ourselves in-house, and then we can take that to them and show them, hey, this is how we did it, and this is what our results were. This is how much money we're making on this.
Right.
This is a tried and true business model.
That's a perfect segue. Let's talk about Zombie Battleground. Let's talk about how that has been useful to have these conversations with these enterprise giants, or even those middle level, developers and gaming companies. Talk us through the success that the Zombie Battleground has already had, and how valuable that's been as the first authentically decentralized game.
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched the game on Kickstarter because our goal was to target mainstream gamers and not just crypto people. So we wanted to use a traditional platform that would get wide exposure. Also to just kind of test the market. Do people care about this idea of really owning your own cards, and why games on the blockchain make sense? And we have gotten like a very core group of people who are like really passionate about what we're building, which has been really inspiring for us. We had about 2,000 people back the Kickstarter, and these are our early alpha testers. And we have quite an active Discord where people are, playing the game and discussing it and balance and stuff like that.
And what was great also is you didn't ask for a huge amount of money. I think you were raising about the 360K mark. So it's commendable that it wasn't exorbitant what you're asking.
Yeah, because I think if you mess up the economics, if you're doing like a game item presale, if you mess up the economics, you've kind of killed the game in the long term. If you give the earliest buyers like these exclusive cards that give them a gameplay benefit, no one else is going to want to play that game because, oh, what's this game? I'm going to try it. Oh, this person who started playing earlier than me has an item that just lets them destroy me and I can't compete with them. It
actually reminds me a lot about some of the arguments of the ICO model itself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So yeah, I think it's really interesting though that you raised that when you had the initiative of utilizing that system with Kickstarter. So talk us through the next phase from that. You still, again, have a very successful outcome so far in the process as you move towards people being able to access this game.
So I think we're not going to know until we actually open up the beta and until we actually enable pack rewards from playing on the ladder matches and have players trading on the marketplace. Because the way that our profit model in the game, we do sell card packs that are optional to buy, but we made the game free to play. So users get a lot of rewards just by playing. They shouldn't feel like they have to buy packs. We're putting the option there.
Right. But what is interesting though is you've had more than 2 million users exposed to this game.
Oh yeah. So in terms of, we kind of like plastered the web with ad campaigns far and wide to kind of bring exposure to blockchain gaming and what we're building. So the game has only been played by this small group of alpha testers so far. Lots of people have seen, the gameplay demo videos and us talking about what the benefits of blockchain gaming are.
Sure. But in that context, let's go back now to the important aspect of enterprise. Now you had 2 million people exposed to it, still in the alpha phase now, and it's going to move into, clearly, as we move into 2019, it's going to move into much more mass adoption scenarios. What's the feedback been from the companies themselves? These very imperative centralized companies that could transition, and arguably you do have one of those first mover positions now. What's the feedback from someone in the core team been from this?
Yeah, so we've had some calls with some pretty high up executives in terms of like game companies, famous IPs, things like that, as part of kind of longer term projects. And the feedback in general has been like a lot of interest. So they want to hear about it. They're really curious about this whole blockchain thing. They've heard a lot about it. They don't really know, what it is or like what, but they know there's potential there. So we've been able to get calls with a lot of big companies and they're very interested, but the sentiment is kind of, well, we want to see someone else do it, right? Like we want to see that this is actually feasible to execute on. So that's why, we're doing it ourselves. We want to take this as a case study, go back to these companies and say, look, here's the audience. Like they're loving the game. We have a profit model based on player to player trading on the marketplace and commissions on that. And this is actually feasible and the players love it because it's not a pay to win game.
But what about centralized interests with regard to, let's say, Microsoft? Any company that potentially could, let's say, anyone with capital, really, that already has interest in these kinds of initiatives like gaming. Are you concerned at all that they have the capital and could essentially do this and do away with what you're doing and just really replicate it?
In terms of building the infrastructure?
Right, because obviously capital is going to be a key part. If they manage to get their own team and they decide to really build out a decentralized model and they already have decentralized games themselves, could they go in-house rather than expand through your technology?
I think what they're going to find is that like this is very, very difficult tech. It's not, and this is the reason why nothing has really blown up until today. This is like, it's very, very difficult tech. And it's not going to be easy to replicate. And I think we're getting to a point where we have enough of a lead where And especially once we get the user adoption, it's not going to make sense to build something from scratch. A lot of big companies they're announcing their own blockchain projects, and it's just going to be kind of these pseudo centralized, like buzzword blockchain just because.
Right. Well, how long have you been working on your project for?
It's been just over a year now.
And do you think that really gives you that lead, like you said?
I think it does. And I think, again, this is going to come down to user adoption more than anything. If we get a game that has tens, hundreds of thousands of users playing on it, and those users are integrated in our marketplace and they're trading on it, and now we're adding new games, it's like the Steam marketplace. Not Steam the blockchain, but Steam like the game marketplace. They kind of own the users' eyeballs. They're where the users go to find new games. Once you have that platform where all these users are validated and verified, that's where the real leverage comes.
Right. Well, you've been doing a lot in the last year, even though it has been a relatively short period of time in the world of business. It's a very long time in crypto. So let's just go through some of them. And I want to talk to you then about the next phase. So you've done things like you've set up your Plasma chain, you've done your SDK, you've certainly started the world's first, arguably, fully decentralized game. It's PC and mobile compatible. That is the Zombie Battlefield. You've also made sure that and that's at the alpha phase at the moment. And then you've also got card pack openings already done. You're already ERC 721 compatible and released. As we talked about, it's already been exposed via ad campaigns. So you've done a lot. But now let's talk about what's coming. What's exciting that perhaps no one really has the advantage that you do, given that in this context for gaming?
So yeah, what's coming is all of our focus is on Zombie Battleground and the marketplace right now, or the majority of our focus, and getting that launched by the end of this year and putting it in open beta so anyone can come in and play. And necessary to get that working is building out the tech that supports it.
What about test nets and main nets, though, with regard to time?
Oh yeah, so we're also opening, or actually the PlasmaChain testnet was just opened recently, so now other developers can deploy to that. Yeah, we kind of want to get our one large scale game running in production because it's really going to stress test the production mainnet and let us know, like, okay, this is ready for scale, this is ready to handle it. And then in parallel, we're opening up testnets. We have one testnet that developers can deploy to now. We're starting another testnet that we're going to have external validators on, because right now we're running all the validators on the Plasma chain and the game chain, but the idea is to open those up to external validators, so we no longer own it. It's just its own thing running in production.
Right. And how's the testing going with regard to those speeds? Clearly, you're already, you mentioned EOS as a comparable sort of potential, but how fast is it currently running at?
I don't have any stress test benchmarks at the moment, but as I said, we have about 2,000 players in the closed alpha right now. And yeah, we haven't come anywhere near capacity in terms of like.
Very safe answer, James, but I'll take that on and I'll challenge it later. But it's good to hear that there hasn't been indicators of stress.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, we do have benchmarks. We've been doing our own stress tests. I just don't know the numbers off the top of my head.
Sure. So what about, obviously you've mentioned those, are there any other things with regard to the future, with regard to trading, for example, building out a marketplace? Is that something else you want to build out?
Oh yeah, that's something that we have and are building out right now. So that's a huge part of our future vision, is this Plasma chain becoming this kind of starting out as a marketplace for in-game assets, but really at the core, the underlying tech of that is functionally a DEX. So we can kind of port this in the future to handle ERC20 atomic swaps, these sorts of things, and just have that be kind of like a centralized hub for token exchanges.
I see. In that way, all kinds of digital assets can become, a huge focus for what you're trying to offer, rather than solely just gaming as one industry. So let's talk now about some of the criticisms as well. And I think it's important. And one of them, for example, I want to talk to you about was the fact that because you are in this process driven approach in collaboration and in consult with your developers, do you think that's the right strategy to go? There's been some criticisms about that, in that some would argue that you need to have much more centralized decision making and move forth from the boardroom. Do you think it's a safe play to do this in a collaborative way?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're not like a distributed governance project or anything like that. We are structured like a company. You know, we do have like a very centralized decision-making process, I guess you could say. But as in any startup or any business, you want to listen to your customers. You want to listen to the people who are actually going to be using your platform. So yeah, I think it's imperative. Otherwise, you're building something no one wants to use. So that's something I think we have quite a good reputation for, is for listening to user feedback and what people actually want to see. And then, you know, we're not afraid to change our minds or be like, oh, yep, well, we said this before, but based on user feedback, this is what people want. We think this is a much better route to go now.
Right. Well, you're certainly proving that already with the changes you've made, and we've discussed them. Now, if we could talk a little bit more about the payment side of things, do you think it's cool that developers are fronting the bill, I suppose is the phrase, or that they're paying for the privilege?
Yeah, because this is how any traditional web hosting has worked all along. So it's closer to the Web 2.0 model.
Okay, and last one I want to talk to you about is the vision, and that is simply because, you know, there's some could do's in your Medium articles. Not so much that are doing, but there's a lot of discussion about what we hope to do, what we want to do. Do you think it's really a good way to go about presenting that kind of plan, especially when you're so pragmatically driven?
Yeah, I think so, because it's a light way of testing the market. If we announce a feature and then everyone's blowing up and coming to us and asking, oh, when's this feature going to be ready? We know there's a lot of demand for that. We mentioned something in passing and kind of no one asks about it or no one's asking for it. We know we can kind of delay that feature longer. So we have a very big team. We have a lot of like projects going in parallel in terms of what we're allocating resources on and what we can do at the same time. And that said, like based on what people are asking for, we'll prioritize our resources that way. So everything that we announce, you know, we have plans on integrating at some point, you know, within the near future, but we'll prioritize based on market feedback.
Right. But in that context though, James, what I'm alluding to is, if you're stating some of the things that could be done, you know, could that potentially lead us down the garden path, in that it gives us the readers too many options, too many potentials, too many ideas, and nothing concrete? Is it necessary to really build out an idea-based system when, again, your tradition so far has always been based on evidence, based on empirical information and content, and particularly that feedback from your community?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid criticism. I'd say that I'm a fan of small bets in business. So you make a lot of small bets and then you see which ones get traction and then you pursue those further. A valid criticism of us is that we do have a lot of ongoing projects, and I think that might be confusing to some people because they're like, what is your focus exactly?
Sure.
But then I think in a lot of cases, these pieces end up coming back together. So Crypto Zombies was our first major success, and we kind of haven't really done much for Crypto Zombies over the past 6 months or so.
Sure.
But now recently, we have Plasma Cash, we have the transfer gateway, we have some really exciting stuff for like game modules coming out, which we'll be announcing probably in the next month here. And suddenly we have this piece, Crypto Zombies, that we can use to build tutorials for this that are going to funnel developers into it. And we can kind of use this as our developer documentation to get people building on Loom. So it's a lot of cases where these kind of disparate projects end up converging in a very strategic way.
It makes a lot of sense. It's almost like the river's widening for a moment, and then it's going to funnel down. It's going to narrow down into a much more focused stream. And in that context, really right now, that zombie Battleground game is going to be imperative for really showcasing the potential of your whole ecosystem. Are you doing enough with regard to the community engagement? Obviously, you don't have your white paper. We talked about that. You have, a significant Discord, a very active developer community. Are you doing enough to engage the community beyond that, though, to let them know what Loom is, what you're doing, and more importantly, that they can interact in these ecosystems?
Yeah, so our focus has always been on the developers, and we haven't done any, focusing on kind of the token speculators or, price speculation and things like that. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are fans of our project, but they're not developers. So they've kind of asked us, hey, what can we do, to support the project? And up until now, it's just kind of been, share our articles, like, spread our stuff on social media. Once Zombie Battleground comes out, and once we have this games aspect, there's going to be a lot more that the regular user can do in terms of playing the game, collecting cards, trading on the marketplace, and obviously spreading that is going to be hugely helpful to our project.
Sure, and that's when it really will be exciting, because we'll get to see a very diverse, suite of games that you'll have on board by then. Are you at all concerned, though, about some of the other decentralized initiatives, particularly in the gaming industry? Right now, I can name two, Engine and Cocos. They're two that are doing things, and more importantly, they are also interacting with technologies that were pre-blockchain. They're utilizing some of the benefits and bringing that in, and they certainly do have some of those interests or alignments and discussions happening with enterprise sectors. So is there space for more than one?
Yeah, so I'd say, first of all, I'm paraphrasing a famous entrepreneur here, or investor, and I can't remember who it is, but he said basically in any new sector, the risk of competition is not between the companies emerging in that sector. It's competing with whatever existed before that sector. So I'd say the space is so small right now that anyone who's increasing adoption of blockchain-based gaming is going to help. It's going to cross-pollinate between these different projects. That said, there's other companies that are focused on blockchain gaming as a sector, or they might compete with one specific component that we have, but I don't think there's any company that's really competing with us as a whole in terms of our whole approach. And we have a strong hypothesis on, because we're building an actual platform where you deploy the entire game onto this platform, and we're aiming to be as decentralized as possible with that.
Absolutely. So you're a full stack solution in that respect.
Exactly.
Right. Well, James, it's been an absolute privilege speaking with you today. There's been so many different aspects that I've certainly learned about your project. It's very exciting that it is so focused on pragmatics. It's so focused on integrating with the communities that you're working with, particularly the developers. You're listening to them, and you're really building out based on evidence. And you're going to use that to show enterprise what you can do, and hopefully build from there. It's great to hear that gaming is really just the start for you. You want to do a lot more than that, and you've certainly got a very large team to lead into the next phase, and that is certainly headed in a business direction. Is there anything you wanted to add as a final statement for the community, for those who want to learn more about Loom?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about us, our website is loomx.io. You can follow us on Twitter. That's our most active channel. It's where we post all of our articles. As Brad mentioned, our Medium blog has tons of articles kind of diving into our thesis and where we think the blockchain is going and why this stuff is important. And yeah, I would say check out Zombie Battleground. We're really excited about opening this up to more users over the coming months. And yeah, we're looking forward to really making this thing blow up.
Absolutely. Well, I wish you all the very best and your team. It is the Loom Network. It is certainly led by a very, very excited team who want to do something that is revolutionary, and starting with Zombie Battleground. Thanks again for your time, James, and we'll look forward to an update soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, mate.